All right,
Welcome, everybody.
yep,
Looks like we're live, huh?
looks like we're doing it live.
Nice. I love this. Uh, Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'll kind of slow play this here for about 30 seconds as people join. We still got a few people popping in here, but I wanted to thank everybody for jumping on to our webinar on how to turn eDiscovery into a profit center. This is pretty exciting, something that is near and dear to my heart. And I know it's a very important thing for my co-presenter here, Ray Biederman, as well. And so we're excited to talk about this. We'll do some introductions here in just a second of Ray and I, but the number one thing that I would like to mention to folks is I would love it if you guys would feel free to chime in at any point in time and ask questions. These things are always the most informative when folks are asking questions about things they're facing in real time, decisions they've got in front of them, hurdles that maybe they're up against. And we'll try and answer those and maybe steer the conversation to make sure we really solve some problems for you guys. So with that, I'm going to ask Ray to introduce himself first. He's an industry vet as well. And I'd love for you to hear a little bit about Ray to kick this off.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so I'm Ray Biederman. I'm CEO and co-founder of Proteus Discovery Group. So we are a eDiscovery company. We work with corporations, in-house counsel, and a lot of firms that are starting in-house eDiscovery departments and helping leverage those services. I've been in the eDiscovery space since 2004. Actually, the first person I work for is Jim Norman. So he's going to talk about that a little bit and all the terrible, how terrible of an employee I was. But you know what they say, if you can't be a good employee, you got to start your own company. So I guess I did that. In addition to that, I was a litigator at an AmLaw 100 firm for a number of years before I left and started Proteus, and then a small firm here based in Indianapolis, Indiana, called Mattingly, Burke, Cohen, and Biederman. All four of us were at Barnes and Thornburg together and started actually, I guess what's today's December 11th. So 11 years ago, almost today. So that's pretty crazy.
Awesome.
Yeah. So Jim, please tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, Jim Norman. I have been in this industry for 27 years. That sounds wild to me to say. My first day in the industry, I was pulling staples, and it was all paper. So that says how old I am, I suppose. But after spending several years in the project management world, at a vendor on the East Coast called Datacon. I don't know if many of you folks would remember that company, but I absolutely loved it. I moved to Indiana and landed at Barnes and Thornburg, where I was hired to scan paper in the lit sport department. And about 2 weeks into realizing that I was scanning in a bunch of printed out emails, I went to our CIO at the time and I asked, begged, and pleaded for him to let me become the department manager and turn that department into an actual litigation support / eDiscovery department where we really utilized technology and kind of put our foot down when it came to some of the practices that just made no sense. And luckily that went really well. We were able to turn the department into a profit center, and I really enjoyed that. From there, I decided that if I could do that at a law firm, I could probably do it for a city and maybe even a region and a little larger. So a good friend of mine and I created a company called eDiscovery. That company did really well. We grew year after year and had a couple of successful acquisitions. And then now I have joined Proteus, where I have found a perfect niche of the medium-sized company that allows me to do all the things that I love to do, and interacting with clients like this, and have loved every second of it. So enough about us. Let's jump into kind of the meat of what we're here to talk about. And I think the number one thing that I want to start by asking you, Ray, and have the conversation kind of focus on in the beginning is, why is it important for us to work with litigators in eDiscovery and making it a profit center for a law firm? And what does that do to help the firm, help you as a litigator, and help you as a partner? And how do we add value to your practice?
Sure. Great question. So one of the big things that I talk about a lot is people went to law school to practice law, and anything that is not practicing law and getting to the truth of the case is a distraction from that. We're geared from our first year, from our first day in law school, to ask questions, to gain valuable insights, and to use the law to help our clients as much as possible. What happens over the course of time and as the proliferation of data continues is more and more all the other stuff becomes the main event. Like, we're not keeping the main thing, which is, what is the truth of this case? How do I best position my client for a good settlement or to win, right? And so eDiscovery sometimes turns into the tail wagging the dog. And so what I think is really important in having an in-house department and leveraging outside resources is to allow the litigator to litigate. So this needs to not be a distraction, it needs to be an addition. So everything that we do, everything that we gear towards is keeping that end in mind, that the case is actually about the facts of the case and the law of the case. It's not about whether or not this custodian deleted 3 emails in 1987, which that would be hard to do. But that's what we really need to think about.
I love that. And one of the things that you said earlier, maybe in another presentation that you were doing, that struck me that might be helpful here is, a lot of times I feel like the lit support department or the eDiscovery department just becomes that extra thing that is sitting there to the side, maybe similar to having mail delivered. And part of that, I think, comes back to the ability for the department to become a profit center, to add to the firm's capabilities and marketing as a whole. And how do you, as an attorney, think about positioning eDiscovery to be more successful and win more matters? And I think all of this will help us frame the steps that we need to go through to create this profit center. But this is the why, right?
Yeah. So whether we like it or not, law firms in the legal industry, there are a couple of built-in inefficiencies. So one of those is each attorney has their specific relationship with a client or a set of clients, and they're their clients, and clients call them because they want them to work on their case, right? And so it makes it very hard to create a scalable business where we have other associates that jump in on work. And so but more importantly, this bubbles up as well in a law firm. So you have different departments in the law firm. And so you've got, the IP department and the litigation department, or even within the litigation department, you have business litigation, or you have patent litigation. And so each of these create their own silos. And one thing that an eDiscovery group needs to do within a firm is they need to sell to each one of those areas. That was one thing that Jim, you did particularly effectively when we worked together, is you recognized that you're selling to each partner and selling to their clients. It's not, okay, we have this department internally, now everybody knows to come and use it, right? Like mail, that could be different, or copying, that's different. But this is unique. It's its own business. And so, Jim, when you got started, how did you recognize that, and what steps did you take to really get out there and market your department?
Well, I think the number one thing that helps in this is to be a bit salesy in your approach of how you handle your department, and I think that's something that we can dive into for sure, tactics and specific things that I did. And I think the step the very first step that is the most important step is getting buy-in from some partners and the management committee. And to do that, you have to be able to sell your services, to be able to discuss why it's important, to talk about yourself as a marketing type person, and make sure that everybody understands that you can really deliver on all the things that you say you can deliver on, but also spread the word so more folks use you. So I think as we're breaking this down into actionable steps and what we think we need to do to make this department work, step one is going to be finding partner buy-in, finding people that are going to support you. At the end of the day, you know, when I was at Barnes and Thornburg, I had, you know, at the beginning, 2 or 3 folks that I think really I could rely on. And when somebody didn't want to pay for a service or didn't want to use us or wanted me to stick with the print and scan method, and I would try and talk to them about this is why you should do it. This is the cost analysis of why you should do it. This is the legal analysis on why you should do something. I would go through all these steps. And ultimately, if I had to go and grab Mark Dinsmore or John Maley or Joe Eaton or Charlie Edwards or whoever it was, I could go grab those guys and say, listen, you know, this person's not following the rules. They're not helping. They're writing things off. They're doing this, that, and the other. So I think number one would be understanding, you know, who is in your corner, and then growing that network through, you know, for lack of a better term, you know, a sales process. Every time that you have a new matter, a new project, it's an opportunity to win over somebody that is going to be a repeat customer within your firm and your department. So one, treating your customers as if they are actual customers in your business and not just people that are coming down to you and requesting a service and you have to now go execute the service. And you know, Ray, you have an interesting perspective on this because while you were a very average intern that worked in the department that really just kind of walked around with a coffee mug most of the time, wasting time, you also you know, have been a partner and utilize these services quite a bit, and you have become an evangelist for these types of services. And you know, I think it made it part of a strategic thought process and you acquiring new clients and customers to having that service in-house. Maybe you can talk a little bit about why you thought it was important to be somebody that was a thought leader in this area and utilizing these services internally.
Yeah. So one thing that I've been thinking a lot about in both building these businesses, but also when I was you know, in Big Law, was assembling the best bench you can, right? So you want the Michael Jordan of each of these different areas, each of the aspects of your case to give you the best strategic advantage. In addition to that, you want to think about the most cost-effective way to preserve budget for the merits of the case. You know, there's this ABA statistic that floats around that 70 to 80% of costs in a case that doesn't go to trial is discovery. And so if you have a group of people that you've assembled together that are really good at discovery, you are covering 70 to 80% of what's going to happen in your case. And you're taking away some of those distractions that enterprising opposing counsel can get into. So if you are, you know, cutting off motions to compel at the pass, or you are really solid on your collection procedure, or if you know that there's a gap in what was collected and in what is available because something got deleted over time, which happens all the time, then you are prepared for each of those avenues of attack. You know, you think about it like a chessboard, and you have your play, you know what the other side's going to play, and you're thinking 2, 3 steps ahead. And so working with an internal department that understands your processes, understands your procedures, and can do that in a repeatable and defensible way just gives you a leg up. And so that's something that has been really big in developing an internal bench strength in this area. And so, Jim, one thing that you did talk about partner buy-in and champions to help get this off the ground. I think that was critically important in some of the early successes that you saw. What helped you identify someone as an internal champion that you could go to for helping, push the cause forward?
Yeah. So I think these folks tend to really buy into using eDiscovery, using the technology. They're thoughtful about it. They're understanding and wanting to learn the process. I think in a lot of these cases, the folks that are not interested in being a champion, they stand out a little bit more. But one of the gentlemen I'm thinking of would help me get presentations at lit lunches and at various department meetings in all of our offices, and in many cases would go stand up there with me when I was kind of given the eDiscovery 101 presentation. And occasionally there was a slide that was a little tougher to talk about because it was sort of the, as he used to say, your failure to plan is not my emergency type of slide. That's tough. That's a little tough for the lit sport guy to stand up in front of a room of litigators and kind of say that, because ultimately it is, right? It is my emergency. However, coming from another partner, that always came across a little bit better. So he would handle that slide. There was also a slide that said, you guys have probably seen this, there's a triangle, and it would say inexpensive, fast, and correct. And you can pick two of those triangles. And so those were the points of the triangle. And those were the two things that they would handle. And I think part of my strategy became to get a fan in every office, as many as I could get, people that I could lean on, people that could then go and be an advocate and give me referrals and talk about, because the partners are going to talk about cases, they're going to talk about experiences. And when, you've got folks out there that are saying, I went to Jim for this matter and we had to jump through a few hoops, but ultimately it was super smooth. We were able to recover some money. The eDiscovery was a profit center. This was great. You should consider it on the next one. And so I think that's the key there in getting that person. And then the next decision that you guys really need to start thinking about is, what type of a department are you going to be from a billing perspective? And so a lot of firms these days are treating eDiscovery and lit support as just kind of a cost of doing business. And that's tricky because this can get relatively expensive. You need good people to do this work, and it is something that that a lot of folks are charging for. So you can sink a lot of money into eDiscovery as a firm if you're not thoughtful about how you bill it back. So not billing it is something that we see quite a bit, and that just lowers the work product, lowers the experience, and doesn't help you guys as a department head or as partners in a law firm get new work in. The other option, the second, probably option that would be out there would be a pass-through model, where you are maybe working with an outside vendor and passing through all of the costs. Every bill goes directly to the end client, and maybe adding some hours of your folks onto that bill internally. And that can work depending on some things that we may touch on in a minute about how good you are at actually billing your time. That's another area where you could cover your costs. And then there's something called a cost plus model, where you're negotiating maybe deals with vendors to get bulk discounts and managing the process a little bit closer, marking up certain things when you add value to certain tasks or processes. And that cost plus model is where you can start to actually really make a difference on the bottom line and the amount of money that you can bring in for the firm. And I think the conversations that you'll have with those evangelists and those managers that are, or the partners that are helping you manage this whole thing, is going to be key in learning which one of these strategies is right for you. The pass-through and the cost plus are the two most important ones that can help you pay for yourself at the bare minimum, which we all want to do, so we can drive more work through our department and get better raises for us selfishly and personally. And one of the struggles that I think you may have, and Ray, I'm interested in your opinion on this, we actually haven't talked about this a lot, is the balance between pass through and cost plus or charging internally and things like that with the various clients. I've noticed a lot of the partners I deal with love the idea of doing this stuff until it comes to their specific client. And then like, well, wait a minute, and I think some of the struggle is that they don't always see the efficiencies that are created, and that it actually does allow the attorneys to bill more time when they do things the right way. And it's just a different way in thinking about it. And so maybe you could kind of talk a little bit about how you communicate that stuff to your clients and the values that you see in billing the time of the eDiscovery folks.
Yeah, so I think you're touching around obviously a really sensitive subject, right?
Sure.
And so how do we bill for it, and what happens when our bill from Proteus goes to a firm, and then that firm either just adds it to their bill, or because they added some value and negotiated a big discount in bulk for the whole firm, what sort of I don't want to say markup, but what sort of cost plus are they adding onto it, right?
Mhm.
And so I think before diving in specifically to experiences that I've had, one of the things that you need to think about internally, and you touched on this a little bit, is the conversations that have to happen beforehand, because you can't. It's really hard to mix and match those things. If you have some clients that are getting it for free, and some clients that you're just passing through, and some clients that you're using a cost plus model on, that's where things start to go awry. And so if you are the department chair inside an internal department, you need to leverage your relationships that you've developed with the management committee, with the other higher ups on the administrative side, to make the decision that this is the model we're going with. And anyone that's not on board with that has to answer to somebody else. It's really easy for a partner to come in to someone that is like a lit support staff or department chair, and go, "We're not billing this. This is off. This is gone." And so
I've heard you
you
say
need.
that.
Hey, let's not talk
Just
about
kidding.
that.
Okay.
But having somebody else who is your advocate, that you've developed that type of relationship with, who can go to that partner and say, no, that this is the model. We bill for this work. That gives the internal department a whole lot more support in making that decision about how to deal with it. Now, specifically to what I've seen, I've seen all of the ways that this can happen. Typically the pass through, the cost plus are probably the most common by far. There's not a lot of firms that want to mark up their hourly rate on attorneys, and then have that be 500, 600, $700 an hour, and then eat $100,000 a month in e-discovery costs. That doesn't seem to be a great model for long-term success. And so what you have to do is either find the right client that signs an agreement with a company, an external company directly, or an understanding that this cost is going to be passed through, and that we have an internal department that will be doing some of this work, and we're going to push as much to them as we can. And then that allows for that kind of cost plus or hybrid model to be a successful fit. So, so Jim, you talked
Okay.
about, some partners who have been reluctant to pass those things on. How have you dealt with that in the past?
I think the best way to deal with that type of scenario is showing success stories, showing the positive feedback that we've gotten from other partners, other projects, and really being able to successfully talk about the numbers, the timeframes, and the real difference that we made in that process. And I think one of the key takeaways in kind of going through the steps to make this become a reality in your lit support department, is knowing exactly what services you want to bill, and quite honestly, if you're just getting started, easing into those. So I think one of the things that I've seen folks struggle with is looking at, all right, we've got, we do some forensic stuff and we want to bill for hosting and we want to bill hours. And then maybe we get into managed review and we're going to do trial support. And that's a whole lot of stuff to take on, right? And you have to be an expert in a lot of things, because at the end of the day, your job as the eDiscovery director or department is to make the partners in your firm look like a rock star. You want to be very valuable in their day-to-day management of the eDiscovery process. And I think sometimes we try and take on all those things, and maybe it's a little bit greedy, right? You want to be an expert in all this. I want them to come to me for all these things. But depending on, the case and the firm and the size, you need a lot of people to manage all this stuff. And so I think kind of the number two thing behind, finding those people to support you would be starting with the most easy thing to bill, which will be hours, and really getting good at, all right, let's make sure that we're going to project manage things really well. Let's make sure that we're going to be the liaison between the case team and the technical folks, the partners and the technical folks. Let's make sure that we're a resource when it comes to marketing and helping our firm get more clients and be a resource for technology and eDiscovery. And so making sure that we start smoothly, start slow, focus on the hours. Then, we'll talk a little bit about doing some more homework on what tools to use, the various hosting platforms and things along those lines, but figuring out the right mix of those, negotiating the right deals, and then decide, all right, does this make sense for us to start billing things on a per gigabyte level and that sort of thing. And you could even get into management of managed review and how do you handle that. But all of these things are very complex, and large vendors have hundreds of people that do these things, and we have many, many folks that do these things. And it's very hard for a eDiscovery department of 2, 3, 4 to manage all of these things really well. So I think making sure you don't bite off more than you can chew is a big factor in being successful at this. But starting with what you're best at, and then and growing from there. And Ray, you've advised some of these folks. You've advised these departments doing different things. What do you think from a attorney perspective in the suite of services that you could get within an eDiscovery department? What are the most beneficial ones and the easiest ones to pass on to your clients internally as a resource that you could sell as a lawyer from an internal department?
Yeah, so I think, and we'll touch upon this a little bit, is workflow consistency, right?
Huge. Yeah.
So if I know and I can talk to a client about, hey, this is how we do X, Y, and Z. This is our quote unquote proven process. And I can say, we're bringing in Jim, who's going to help us with this step, and this step in the process. We've done this lots of times. We have these workflows that we utilize in a consistent way. That adds a lot of comfort. It adds a skill level to the whole process, and it allows for me to build that time. And then the question quickly becomes, I think you touched on this a little bit. There's one or two people within the department, and they manage 50 cases, 60 cases. And so knowing when it's time to get that next person in the mix, having some metrics around, this is how much revenue we need. And once we hit that mark, we know that we're going to get another resource internally. One of the things that, this is just from a business owner perspective, right, is we look somewhere, like the overall metric is somewhere between, for a services business, between $300,000 and $350,000 of revenue per person. So if you hit that mark and you're tracking a little above that, then you know it's time to start looking to add somebody into the mix. And now what you can do with an internal department, which is actually pretty useful, is you know that you're outsourcing a certain amount of this work to a vendor. And you can see the amount that you're vending out in any given month. And if that is consistently above the 350, $400,000 mark for time, time that's being billed, then you know that it's time to maybe have a conversation about adding an additional internal resource. And so that's a great way to leverage a vendor in order to help grow your department. What are some things, what are some other things you looked at when you decided, hey, maybe it's time to add another internal resource?
Yeah, I think that's you hit the nail right on the head, and it's about growing the department and the amount of hours that you're tracking and the workflows that you're following, and figuring out, what the tipping point was for each specific function of the job and each specific employee. And I think um, touching on that workflow thing real quick, one of the things that I think is the most important there to mention, and then I'll answer your question, but if you can define a very repeatable workflow that you can talk about to everybody, to talk about in your presentations, to talk about in your one-on-ones with partners and associates and everybody, and educate, this is how we do this. And every case is going to have its little nuances. Every matter is going to be a little bit different here and there. But generally, if you can try and define a repeatable workflow, this is something that I've seen over and over again that can make or break a department. A lot of times I've noticed, folks sitting there and they're very reactive to the requests that are coming in from their case teams. And of course, customer service is key, and we want to be responsive and do exactly what they ask and get. But ultimately, it's what is their goal? What are they trying to achieve at the end of all this? And if we can figure out a way to have a defined, repeatable, best practice process that we do over and over and over again, with little spin-offs here and there, maybe some data is a little different, maybe there's a special instance in a case, but we have to try and convey to our teams that this is the best way to do this, and we kind of got to stick to that. That allows us to be more efficient every day, and then, to your point, we're not spending time doing the wrong things, all these workarounds and all these, well, they wanted it done this way just cause, and so we're going to do it just this way because this person asked for it that way, even though we know there's probably a more efficient way to do it. So treating this as if it is your own business, as you said, following these repeatable, defined workflows and being as efficient as you possibly can allows you to get a lot more work done with less people. So that number that you put out there, $350,000, is a great benchmark, because you may find that you're strapped for time, you're stressed, you're always working on tough deadlines, but you're not quite hitting that number. And part of that may be because you haven't followed a repeatable process, which is successful in any organization. That's the one of the things that's going to lead to the most healthy organizations. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention along those lines is time tracking. This is not something that is inherent to us as technical folks. And so, attorneys, and Ray, you can attest to this, you guys live and breathe by your billable hour. And that is something that clients are used to seeing. And us as technical folks are kind of bad at that, I would imagine, a lot of times. And so I think the next point, that's something that you really got to think about and talk to if you're really starting to start one of these billable departments in your firm, is getting a good conversation going with the accounting department, talking to some of the best billers in the organization, in the firm, and understanding what do clients like to see on bills? What do those times look like? What makes sense from a billable time perspective? And then you have to hold your department to some pretty high standards on making sure they put together good explanations of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and consistently and on time bill those things regularly. There's a million horror stories out there about folks that are trying to do this, but then, the technical people aren't great at sitting down and keying in their information. And I think that would make it a lot easier for you to sell to your clients, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of, well, most clients, they see the billable hour and they understand, they've heard about it their whole life that you're going to get charged, in 6 minute increments. And I basically, everything in my life is in a 6 minute increment. So, that's a thing. And I've got my little diary here and online and all of that great stuff. And so we need to make sure that we are selling a service and fitting into that box, uh, and that's a good starting place. And then we can spider out to billing by the gigabyte for this, or billing a flat fee for that. But having that sort of relationship with the hour is a very helpful entree to getting people to understand the value of the service that they're getting. Whether there's lots of talk about alternative fee arrangements and all this other stuff, and I've been involved in lots of
Sure.
those conversations over time. And 90% of them get back to, well, but how many hours did you spend on it? And
Right.
so you still end up billing by the hour, even if you're calling it something alternative. And if we can find a different way to do that, then we'll all be billionaires, and we can have our own private islands. But until that happens, we're going to be billing in 6 minute increments.
I love it. No, that makes a ton of sense. And I think you touched on the sort of the sales process of all that and what we can add to the case teams. And I think that brings me to a thought on what's the most important role within the department. If you're a firm here and you don't have anybody in your department, you're thinking of that first hire, or if you're a department of one and you're trying to figure out where do you fit and what the next route to go is. I'm a little biased as I've kind of morphed into a sales guy in my over my career. However, I have a strong feeling that a technical salesperson internally is probably the number one thing that you might need to make a successful e-discovery department work within a firm. And the reason I say that, and for my super technical folks that are out there, and some Proteus folks that I love that are on the call, don't get mad at me, but I think a lot of times the really technical geniuses that we have are very focused on the next project that is handed to them, and people bring them work and they're going to knock it out of the park and do a great job, and then oftentimes they sit and wait for the next opportunity. And I think one of the things that made my department so successful was that I spent a lot of time out in the hallways, walking around, not just meandering about with a coffee mug like Ray did, but like poking my head into offices when I saw, whatever the e-discovery tool of the time was, whether it was Viewpoint or Summation or Concordance going way back, and Relativity and some of the more recent past. But poking my head in there and say, hey, how's that going? Are you figuring this out? Are you struggling with any issues there? I would return the jobs. I would be out there with a dolly and a box of paper if I had to, or a stack of CDs, or following up and making sure that they could download the deliverable. And so, I think internal sales and marketing for this department is key. Treating this as if it is a legitimate company that you need to. We had an intranet. I don't know if people have those things still, but back then we had an intranet, and I would post articles and I would write entries on those things. I would ask for the folks that were fans of what we were doing to co-author things for me or do presentations with me. And I think the more success stories that you can gather by being out there and talking to folks is going to lead to the most successful department that you have. And maybe Ray, you guys have a completely different idea as a partner, but maybe you just want technical people behind the fence. But I think it makes sense to have somebody out there with you that can go do presentations with you at corporate clients and win over their e-discovery work as well.
Yeah, completely agree. So we have gotten a question. So I wanted
Oh,
to,
love that.
and it's for you. All
Oh,
right.
good. Oh
You
boy.
ready? You ready for
Yeah,
it?
lay it on me. Yep.
Well, first question was, how'd you get those luscious locks? No, I'm kidding.
Dang it. That's
Yeah.
the one I wanted to answer.
No, but here's a question. At some
Yeah.
point, could you go over a specific example of how the cost plus model would work logistically? Assuming the lit support team within a firm uses a vendor like Proteus, what would it look like to leverage the services from Proteus to generate income for the firm?
Love that. So the first thing that I would start to do is, be candid and negotiate with the vendor that you're talking to, the vendors that you would like to use. And one of the things that we can touch on now is like picking the suite of technology and the tools and the services that you're going to partner with a vendor on, and really understanding what those are. But most vendors out there, especially Proteus, will understand what you're trying to do and will work with you to kind of negotiate in bulk. So when I was running my department, I had negotiated deals to host data with certain folks, and as a firm, you're ultimately going to be continuously using up hours, using up gigabytes, terabytes over and over again, month after month. And then if you had a brand new project that was 3 gigs and you walked in off the street with a 3 gig project, the price that you might get is going to be very different than if you have 3 terabytes or 10 terabytes or whatever it is. And so firms these days, obviously across all their matters, especially if they're bringing in, a bunch of great cases, they're going to have tons and tons of data. And so I think in practice, the way that I have done it in the past is negotiate bulk deals, make sure that, as a department manager, you're managing, all those relationships, you're managing all that data, you're managing each specific matter. And then you have the ability to kind of recoup some of the cost to manage all that by, again, marking it up isn't quite the right answer, but it's like, the rate of what you're going to be able to bill is going to be a little bit higher than what you're paying at that bulk. But you have to manage all that. You have to pay attention to it. And so it makes sense to add a little bit to the bottom line, or you're just going to let money leak out the back end by babysitting all that data all the time. And so it does make sense for you to get the right technical people and the right project managers and all those folks in there, and you have to pay for them by marking up those costs a little bit. And I think for the most part, the buying power that a lot of these firms have these days to buy, hosting services from a company like Proteus across the board for, 10 to 500 cases will ultimately allow you to drive that cost down across the board.
It's great. So we were talking a little bit about internal sales, and you posed a question to me about that and what advantages there are to that. And so the way I think about an internal lit support department, is pretty similar to the way that I think about Proteus, right? So we define what our ideal client profile is. So that's whether it's what type of case it is, what type of client it is, or what type of law firm we want to have discussions with. And we go and we find people in there that are like-minded and connect with them, and then help make that sale. So internally in a lit support department or in-house eDiscovery department, it works kind of the same way on a micro scale. So you are talking to each partner as if they're a different client, and you want to develop relationships with them to help sell them on using your services. Now, whether or not you end up vending that out to a company, or you just handle it internally, you want to be that point person. You want to be the person they come to first. And so that can be dictated by the firm. And we see this all the time. There are firms that have policies in place that say you have to go to this person, this role, in order to do eDiscovery. Now, we all know that there are lots of end arounds of that in all these different places, because if I'm the partner on the case, I want to pick who I use. I'm not letting somebody else pick, right? And so developing that relationship to become that trusted advisor is an important part of this whole process. Um, Jim, what experience did you have with that internally, and how did you design yourself as a salesperson with a captive market?
Yeah, that's so customer, it all boils down to customer service at the end of the day. And I do believe that there's a lot of internal folks that don't necessarily think about that when they're approached by a case team and they have, I need this data loaded, or I need to figure out this eDiscovery process. And so I think for the most part, my theory was always that I wanted to try and make sure that I left that case team amazed, and I left them feeling like I was a real resource. And managing the project early on, my first, handful of these, before we, had any internal hosting capabilities or things along those lines, but managing the expectations of the case team, managing the expectations of the vendors, making sure that we spent time having real conversations about the budget. And this is where it gets a little tricky. Sometimes we'll have, not that Ray's ever done this, but they wants things done so inexpensively that it leads to problems down the road. And so I think sitting in this seat, sometimes it's a little tricky because you kind of have to be an advocate for both sides, because oftentimes you get what you paid for. And so I think managing the expectations of the vendor, managing expectations of the partners or the case team or whoever it is, and being that reasonable go-between, even though you do work for the firm, ultimately your job is to make sure that the project is successful, on time, and on budget. And sometimes you got to have some tough conversations with folks to explain, like, all right, I hear what you're asking for. I know what you're saying, and I get it. But however, that's not exactly how it's going to work. And I don't think if we go down that path, it's not going to ultimately be the best result. And so having those honest conversations and making sure then you deliver on those promises is key. And sometimes, you attorneys work some wild hours, and sometimes that means picking up the phone at 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, or pulling an all-nighter, or coming in and working on databases on the weekends and things like that. And so I think when you show that you're willing to go above and beyond and all those things, that you end up getting some raving fans. And that's what ultimately ends up becoming the key to your success. And the more of those you add, the more of those that'll go to bat for you, the more of those that will speak to the management committee when it comes time to, ask for more money, or ask for this tool, or ask for a raise, or ask to hire somebody, and they see that you're out there, in the trenches with folks. It will change the game, and it will change kind of your power within the firm to ask for more things and to get those things. And so, hopefully we develop some good internal salespeople that can then start to get some really savvy, solid technical people underneath.
Yeah, and Jim, you bring up a good point, and it's something that you are always really good about, and it's like the next project, right? So we do a great job, deliver something, and then you ask that internal partner or whoever, you ask them, what else do you have coming up? How else can I help you with something else or something different? And that you think that you're being annoying and asking for more, and maybe you get the partner that like brushes you off right away and says, get out of here, I don't want to talk to you. And that happens, but it also makes that partner think about, what am I not asking from my client? Am I not asking them about the next project? Am I not asking them, how else I can plug in? And then it bubbles up that way, right? And you have certain partners that will go and make that ask and say, you know what, I haven't talked to this client in a while, or this project is about to end. Maybe I should ask what's next. And so then it works both ways, right? And what's good for you guys in the lit support department getting more work is good for us, because it means that us as partners and litigators are getting more work as well. So I think that that's a really good symbiotic relationship that you can develop with certain sets of partners in a firm. One thing I wanted to jump to is, you talked a little bit about the tech stack, and I was wondering how you balance diversifying the tech stack versus like sticking with one product no matter what.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a delicate balance, and I kind of like quarterbacks. I think a lot of lit sport folks think about it like quarterbacks. If you have two quarterbacks, it's because you don't have one. But I don't necessarily think that that's true in eDiscovery, because you need a couple of tools to be able to respond to all the various requests that you may have. I think we can all agree that no two matters are the exact same. We've got a lot of different capabilities and needs. And so I ultimately always wanted to have partnerships with folks that could help me out no matter what. Sometimes you need the latest and greatest, most up-to-date technical capabilities, and you're going to try all the brand new stuff. All the AI, you're going to try, in today's terms, we didn't do much AI back in the day, but you're going to try all the new stuff, right? You want TAR, you want to make sure that it's the tool that everybody knows and you can get the most people in, all that sort of thing. And that's certainly very necessary a lot of times. Other times, the client just doesn't have the budget for those types of things. And other times you got to get a little bit more creative when it comes to cost. And I think you can attest, Ray, there's a million different clients out there and budgets and things along those lines. And the last thing that you want to do is have your case team hamstrung by expensive hosting charges or processing fees or things along those lines. So my strategy was always to have at least a couple tools available. We always had at least two, maybe three tools available at any given time that I knew I could prescribe and put the matter in the right tool. And so often what I did, I tried hard to ask a bunch of questions in all these initial meetings with the case teams, whoever brought me the matter. The last thing I wanted to do was sit there and just listen to them tell me all the things they need done and then take off. I really wanted to ask them about deadlines and budget and what was important in the matter, what types of documents we have, how many custodians, what do we think the volume is going to look like? And I had a list of probably 20 questions that I could still dig up if anybody's interested in them. And I would ask all these questions and start to formulate my game plan on the route that I think this matter needed to go to have the most success for this case team and this client. And sometimes it, led to some tough conversations. But I think if I always sent the matter to the same platform, the same tool, no matter what, there would have been a bunch of wasted time and wasted energy and probably wasted money as well.
Yeah. So, you talked about some of that and particular like different vendor relationships. So what is something that an in-house department would look for in a vendor relationship, and what's something that's a red flag in a vendor relationship? With understanding, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer that, and then we're going to top line all of the things that you need to look for in developing an in-house department. So there you go.
Perfect. Yeah, let's go. So, I think you just need somebody in your foxhole. The amount of times that I had to call a project manager or grab somebody internally in my department and just say, listen, Biederman called us again with a completely ridiculous request and unreasonable deadline. That sucks. But here we are. How are we going to figure it out, and how are we going to make it right? And I've always used the phrase, I want to make the case teams look like rock stars at the end of the day. And you need that same thing for you with the teams. And so the vendor that is going to be flexible and work with you to help realize that there's more work coming, right? We just need to get through this one and figure it out. So that's number one. I'm not a fan of when you got a relationship with a vendor and there's kind of a sea of people that you dump your request to. There's times when you really need that specific case and project knowledge, the way this case team likes to operate, the way that this specific paralegal functions. You want your folks to know that. And I think a lot of times if you're submitting requests to something and any of 20 people could grab it, you lose some of that. So those are probably the top two things that I would say.
So if I'm going to interpret what you said a little bit, you want someone that delivers, that's committed, that is sincere, and is adaptable.
That I see what you did there. Yes, core values. Yes, that's great.
Awesome. So Jim, can
Yeah.
you, in the last couple of minutes here, and then maybe we'll have some questions. Can you just walk through kind of the steps that you would look at in building one of these departments internally?
Yeah. So super high level, and I could talk about this all day. I would, I really think each firm has its own unique needs and things like that. So to the extent that anybody wants to reach out offline and talk about this in general, it's just something I like. It's not something I charge for or anything along those lines, but I'm happy to do it. But I think number one is conversations within management team and partners, lead litigators, the tech savvy paralegals, the associates that are really hungry, and get some fans, get some people that buy in and want to help you do this. I love the idea of asking for as a lit sport person, you're going to do all this work, get some skin in the game, ask for a cut of things, figure out a way to get quote unquote commission of some sort. And there's a lot of different ideas that I have there on that sort of thing. Have conversations about what type of a department you're going to run. Is it going to be cost plus? Is it going to be pass through? Hopefully it's not that other one. And that may be what a lot of departments are doing now, where you're just a cost center. And we don't want to just spend money on this without recouping some of it. Being thoughtful about what you want to build and the services that you're going to ease into. And you don't need to start by building everything right off the bat every day. Get better, lock them down one service at a time. Maybe it's hours, and then it's gigabytes, and then it's processing. Develop a repeatable workflow that you can talk about over and over and over again, and really pound that into the heads of the partners and the paralegals and the case teams that you're dealing with. Really talk. This is our standard process. I understand it's going to get different every now and again, but really have a standard process and stick to it as much as you possibly can, and try and force folks down that route. The least fun, get good at billing, tracking your time, making sure, because that's how we prove the work that we do. That's how we show that when we're working those 50, 60-hour weeks, that we need more people, and that when we go ask for a raise, we ask for a bonus, all those things, we have that backup. Obviously, picking the right tools, creating the right relationships with vendors, understanding the buying power and negotiating. Those are big factors. And lastly, and most importantly, is get comfortable being a bit of a salesperson. Go visit your clients. It doesn't matter if there's, we have meetings like this these days, but, visit, get in front of folks in other offices, key litigators, associates that are passionate about it. Paralegals are the ones that are often in there really doing the work, and be a partner with those folks, be an advocate for what they need, try and understand what would make their lives a little bit easier, and try and implement that as much as you can, and really become an advocate for those folks to help them make their life easier, and have them come to you. And then you bill your time, and you everybody's happy. You have a lot of success, and you as lit support folks get a bunch of huge raises, which is ultimately what we're all hoping for, right?
All right. So, so this kind of brings us to the end. If there's, a quick question, feel free to jump it in. But Amy, do you want to jump to that last slide for us? Oh,
No, boy,
there we
that
go.
was
So after this seminar, we're going to give out an ebook that Jim so kindly wrote for us about how to build an e-discovery practice at your firm. Feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. There's Jim's email, there's my email. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And yeah, if there's nothing else, then have some great holidays, and we look forward to talking to you guys now and in the new year.
awesome. Thank you, everybody.